What if the most formidable tank in the world was the biggest deception in military history? A machine that by its appearance alone made US and British generals quake. It was called the weapon of the future, yet inside lurked a true engineering nightmare. We'll tell you the truth about the IS-3, the tank with the pike nose that never once fired a shot in the war it was built for. You'll learn how a brilliant idea was born from bitter defeats and monstrous losses, and how Soviet designers, in a terrible rush, assembled a steel monster whose armor cracked and whose engine failed. We'll show you what Israeli engineers saw when they got their hands on this symbol of Soviet might as war trophies, and how they made it serve their purposes in the most humiliating way for a tank. This is the story of how a single photograph taken in a parade in Berlin turned global tank design on its head, while the machine itself never lived up to the hopes placed on it. About the curse of the rush job and the paradox where the most influential tank of the century also turned out to be the most flawed. Watch till the end. The debunking of the legend will shock you.
September 7th, 1945. Berlin, still smelling of ashes and the dust of the defeated Reich, hosted a parade of Allied troops. In the stands, the victors, American and British generals in immaculately polished uniforms, they watched the procession of equipment, feeling rightful pride in their army's might. And at that moment, an unfamiliar heavy tread rumbled over the cobblestones. From around a corner crawled a column of steel monsters the West had never seen before. 52 fearsome machines with sharp, arrow-shaped noses and flattened turrets seemingly pressed against the hulls. It was the Soviet heavy tank, the IS-3. A tense silence fell over the stands, followed by feverish whispers. Military experts instantly forgot about the parade, frantically taking notes, trying to assess the unthinkable armor angles and the caliber of the long-barreled gun. Their faces, tanned by the sun, went pale. They had just seen the future, and that future spoke Russian. The victors' parade had, in an instant, turned into a demonstration of absolute technological superiority by one side. The phenomenon was that this tank, already inspiring terror, had never fired a shot in battle. Its fame was born not on the battlefield, but on the cobblestones of the enemy's defeated capital. The pike nose and streamlined turret became more than just design elements. They became a visible symbol that all Allied tanks were suddenly considered, if not obsolete, then certainly inferior. A question arose that would haunt Western intelligence for a long time. How did a country, having borne the brunt of a monstrous war, manage to create something so revolutionary at its very end? The answer lay not in triumph, but in tragedy. The story of the IS-3 began a year earlier, within the walls of a design bureau, buried under frontline reports and black and white photographs. The photos were horrifying. Knocked-out Soviet heavy tanks, IS-2, with their armor torn open. The Battle of Kursk was behind them. The army was advancing west, but the price of victory was exorbitant. German 88-inch guns could penetrate the frontal armor of Soviet heavy tanks from a kilometer away, turning crews into the buried alive. It became clear, simply increasing plate thickness was a dead end. A qualitative leap was needed. A shape was needed that would make armor invulnerable. Thus, in the late summer of 1944, the top-secret project, Kirovets-1, began. Engineers were given a task that sounded like a challenge to the laws of physics: achieve maximum shell resistance with minimum weight. And they proposed a solution bordering on madness: abandon the flat front of the hull. Instead, a three-sloped conical nose section, where a thick 110mm plate was positioned at such an angle that an enemy shell would have to slide off, ricochet, not penetrate it. This daring design, unprecedented in the world, was meant to be the answer to all the pain and loss. The designers understood they had no room for error. They had to embody in metal an idea that would forever change the face of war. The idea the designers seized upon was simple and brilliant at the same time. Instead of increasing armor thickness, which led to monstrous weight gain, they decided to cheat physics. The frontal hull was formed from three powerful armor plates converging at different angles, creating the famous pike nose. This shape didn't just protect, it actively resisted. An enemy shell meeting the sloped surface lost significant energy and was highly likely to ricochet without even trying to punch through the steel. 110mm of intelligently positioned armor were equal in effectiveness to much greater thickness if the plate were vertical. This was a qualitative breakthrough, a revolution in protection philosophy. But the vulnerable spot of any tank was the turret. Loss analyses showed it was hit most often. The answer was an equally revolutionary design. Abandoning tall, traditional turrets, engineers created a flattened, streamlined half-sphere resembling an inverted saucer. It had strong angles of inclination in all directions, sharply increasing the chance of ricochet. Moreover, this low silhouette made the turret much less noticeable and a harder target on the battlefield. This wasn't just a new part, it was a new concept of survivability. However, each such breakthrough came at a price. The IS-3 was born under extreme time pressure. The front needed new equipment yesterday, and there was no time for leisurely testing and refinement. Designers had to compromise. Many components, especially in the suspension and transmission, were borrowed from the previous model, the IS-2, without radical changes. The development cycle was compressed to the limit, and some solutions were implemented straight off the drawing board. It was a race against time, with the lives of future crews at stake. And so, in the spring of 1945, the first serial IS-3s left the assembly shops. The sight that met the military inspectors was mesmerizing. Before them stood not just a tank, but the embodiment of power in metal. Low, squat, with a sharp, aggressive nose and a smooth, almost polished turret from which the fearsome barrel of a 122mm gun protruded. It weighed 46 tons, could move at speeds up to 40 kilometers per hour, and carried a gun capable of destroying any enemy with one hit. It breathed absolute, indestructible strength. But within that strength hid a bitter irony of history. While the tank was being assembled and tested, the French were an aspect already, and the high watermark of IS-3 design thought was to enter history as a victor without victory.
The heart and main argument of the IS-3 was its gun, the 122mm D-25T tank gun, already a legend on the battlefields. This was a weapon of categorical, almost absolute superiority. Its massive armor-piercing shell, weighing 25 kilograms and leaving the barrel at 800 meters per second, was a death sentence for any armored vehicle of the time. At a range of 1 kilometer, it guaranteed penetration of 160 millimeters of homogeneous armor, meaning certain doom even for the most protected German Tigers and Panthers from the first hit. However, this crushing power came at a high tactical price. The huge separate loading rounds, the 25-kilogram slug, and a separate propellant charge required the loader to have immense strength and skill. The whole process took time, and the practical rate of fire, even for a trained crew, did not exceed 2 or 3 rounds per minute. This was a sniper's rifle, not a machine gunner's. It demanded an accurate first shot because a second chance in a fleeting tank battle might not come. Auxiliary armament completed the picture. A 7.62mm DTM machine gun coaxial with the main gun for infantry, and a heavy 12.7mm DSHK on a roof-mounted turret for use against aircraft or light armored vehicles. Inside this steel Predator, the crew of 4 received noticeable improvements over its predecessors, the IS-1 and IS-2. Perhaps the most important innovation for survival was equipping the driver with his own hatch in the hull roof. This allowed him to quickly escape in a critical situation, but more importantly, it eliminated the dangerous vision slit in the very forehead of the pike nose, the most vulnerable point on the armor of previous models. Instead, the driver operated the vehicle, observing the terrain through safer periscopic devices. The other 3 crew members, commander, gunner, and loader, were located in the spacious turret. The gunner had a modern telescopic sight for accurate long-range work, and the commander, in addition to controlling the vehicle, could observe through a set of vision devices. Powering this 46-ton mass was the power plant well known from previous models, the V12 diesel engine V11 with 520 horsepower. It accelerated the vehicle to 40 kilometers per hour on the highway and provided an operational range of about 340 kilometers, acceptable for a heavy breakthrough vehicle. Designers, mindful of harsh Russian winters, equipped the engine with a preheating system, allowing it to start even in severe frost. Altogether, powerful armament, thoughtful ergonomics, and a proven engine created on paper the image of a perfect fighting machine. This same image, embodied in polished steel, produced the effect of a bombshell on the Western generals in Berlin. However, a parade is one thing, and daily, harsh operation in the troops is quite another. Soon after the first IS-3s entered service, deep and troubling cracks began to appear through the shiny, almost futuristic facade. The first reports from military units arriving at design bureaus and the ministry painted a picture strikingly different from the parade ideal. American and British commanders, stunned by the appearance of the pike nose on Berlin's cobblestones, had no idea what nightmare was hidden beneath this revolutionary armor. The main tragic contradiction of the IS-3 was that its innovative, ahead-of-its-time form was draped over raw, unfinished, and hastily assembled content. And the more these tanks accumulated kilometers in exercises, the more obvious it became. Behind the breakthrough exterior lurked fatal design flaws that would soon require not just repair, but full-scale surgical intervention on every built specimen.
The official investigation began in 1946, when it became clear the problems were systemic, not isolated. A special commission created to study defects revealed an unflattering truth. Its results shocked even the seasoned designers. The V11 engines, operating at their limits, failed with frightening regularity, and repairing them in field conditions was extremely difficult. The gearbox proved a disaster. It failed under high loads, and its unreliability threatened to leave the tank immobilized right on the battlefield. But the most dangerous defect were cracks discovered in the hull armor around the engine transmission compartment. These structural damages, arising from vibration and stress, cast doubt on the hull's very integrity and could lead to catastrophic consequences from a direct hit. The root of all these troubles lay in the conditions of the tank's birth. The IS-3 was a classic wartime rush job. It was designed and launched into series production under extreme time pressure, where every day of delay was measured in lives on the front. In the pursuit of speed, designers were forced to take ready-made, but not always suitable, components from the IS-2, squeezing them into the new layout.
Many new technical solutions, especially concerning the welding of the complex pike nose armor parts, simply didn't undergo the necessary cycle of comprehensive durability testing. Production was also carried out with simplifications dictated by wartime. As a result, a machine was born in which a brilliant armor concept was combined with raw and unreliable technical guts. A desperate and costly struggle to correct the mistakes began. A large-scale modernization program called UKN, Elimination of Design Shortcomings, was launched. Thousands of already produced tanks returned to factories where engineers worked night and day to patch the holes, reinforcing welds, replacing transmission parts, refining engine cooling systems. However, experience showed that fundamentally raw machines were almost impossible to rework. Fixing one problem often created new ones. By mid-1946, it became obvious. Further production of the IS-3 in its current form was pointless. Production was halted after just over 2,000 machines, a drop in the ocean by Soviet tank industry standards. Despite this verdict, the tanks had already entered service, and their fate was twofold. On one hand, mechanics and tankers cursed them for their finicky nature and maintenance complexity. On the other, those who served on the IS-3 genuinely valued them for one key quality: phenomenal, almost mythical protection. In exercises and firing drills, the pike nose lived up to its legend, making the tank an impregnable fortress from the front. Thus, a stark contrast emerged. The parade symbol of invincible might was in reality a steel sufferer with a sick heart and bones. And in this contradiction, the main question remained open. If fate ever provided a chance, could this lame legend, this beautiful but sickly predator, prove its true strength in real combat? The first and only time the IS-3 entered battle under Soviet flags was more than 10 years after its creation. In the autumn of 1956, these tanks were thrown into suppressing the anti-Soviet uprising in Hungary. In the narrow streets of Budapest, their qualities found application. The powerful armor confidently withstood hits from handheld anti-tank grenade launchers and light gunfire, and the 22mm gun effectively destroyed barricades and fortified buildings. Losses were minimal, confirming that in specific conditions of urban combat, with short distances and limited maneuver, the IS-3 was still a formidable force. However, this was an episode, not a major war. In the role of export weapon, the tank was used extremely sparingly. The USSR, usually generous with supplies, showed surprising stinginess. Poland and Czechoslovakia received only one specimen each, exclusively for parades and study. The only country to receive the IS-3 in significant numbers, about 100 machines, was Egypt. Cairo's generals, impressed by the legend of invulnerability, saw in them their secret trump card against Israel. They hoped its powerful armor and gun would guarantee victory in a clash with Western equipment. These hopes were not to be realized. In the Six-Day War of 1967, Egyptian IS-3s first met in open battle with modern opponents, Israeli Centurions and American M48s. The outcome was catastrophic. The reasons for the defeat lay not so much in the tank itself, but in the conditions of its use. Egyptian crews were poorly trained, many barely mastering control of the complex machine. The war took on a highly mobile character, where speed of reaction, rate of fire, and tactical flexibility were decisive. And here, the IS-3 lost on all counts. Its low mobility and monstrously long gun reloading time put crews at a disadvantage.
The Israelis, using superiority in training and mobility, outflanked the clumsy giants, striking their vulnerable sides and rear where the armor was weaker. Theoretical superiority in frontal armor proved useless. The rout was worsened by the panic and disorganized retreat of the Egyptian army. More than half of the approximately 70 lost IS-3s were abandoned in working order and fell into Israeli hands as trophies. Thus, the symbol of Soviet might, created to intimidate the West, ended up en masse in the hands of its Middle Eastern ally. For the Israeli army, this was an unexpected and valuable gift. And now they faced a question: what to do with these steel relics, which in their hands proved even more useless than in Egyptian ones.
For Israeli military engineers, the captured IS-3s became a unique testing ground. They thoroughly dissected the legendary Pike nose, assessing armor quality and assembly. One of the main conclusions was disappointing. The V-11 engines in most machines were heavily worn and unreliable, but the Israelis were famous for finding unconventional solutions from what was at hand. And at hand, they had many captured Soviet T-54 and T-55 tanks whose V-54 diesel engines were more reliable and well understood for repair. Thus, a brilliant improvisation was born. Israeli mechanics began mass heart transplants. They removed the temperamental V-11s and installed the proven V-54s in their place, sometimes transferring parts of the engine compartment from the T-54 along with the engine. The result was a unique hybrid, the hull and turret of the legendary IS-3 with the power plant of a later Soviet medium tank. These machines, designated Tehran 3 in the Israeli army, got a second wind. However, even with a new heart, the IS-3 was not considered a full-fledged main battle tank. The era of heavy, slow giants was coming to an end. The Israelis found another very ingenious use for them. Some machines were converted to tractors, where their power and sturdy chassis came in very handy. But the most unusual application awaited other specimens during the War of Attrition, 1969 to 1970. Their engines and transmissions were removed, making space for additional ammunition. Then these immobilized hulls were buried up to the turret in the ground at key points along the Bar-Lev defensive line on the Suez Canal. Thus, the IS-3s turned into long-term, super-protected firing points. Their powerful armor made them nearly invulnerable to Egyptian artillery, and the 122mm gun allowed effective counter-battery fire and destruction of targets on the opposite bank. This was a grim but logical metamorphosis. A tank created for rapid breakthrough became a stationary, reinforced concrete pillbox. The irony of fate reached its peak when Egyptian troops, during one operation, managed to cross the canal and capture such a few fortifications. They found empty, shell-pocked hulls of their own former tanks, which had first been lost in panic, then repaired by the enemy, used against them, and abandoned again. The IS-3's career ended in complete absurdity. It changed hands twice on the battlefield without firing a single shot in its final static role.
By the early 1970s, the era of heavy tanks as a separate class was over. The IS-3, like its few brethren, were finally relegated to deep reserve or scrapped. World armies made a definitive choice in favor of universal main battle tanks, combining acceptable protection, powerful armament, and good mobility. Specialized steel giants like the IS-3 became an anachronism. However, the true legacy of the Pike nose is not measured in years of service or combat scores. Its main result was its colossal, paradoxical influence. The tank that practically never fought determined the development paths of global tank design for decades to come. Its appearance in Berlin was a technological shock for the West. American and British designers, having received intelligence and photographs, feverishly began studying its armor principles. The form of the pike nose and the flattened cast turret were meticulously analyzed and had a direct influence on new tank projects across the ocean. The IS-3 forced the USSR's potential opponents to urgently seek an asymmetric response, giving a powerful impetus to the arms race. No less important was its influence on its own school. Soviet designers, taking into account both the brilliant solutions and the bitter lessons of the IS-3's unreliability, used this experience as the foundation. The flattened turret and the philosophy of differential sloped armor were developed and embodied in metal in subsequent machines like the futuristic IS-7 and the last Soviet heavy tank, the T-10. The concept of active protection through shape, not just thickness, became a cornerstone of Soviet and Russian tank design for decades to come. Thus, the IS-3 remains in history forever, not as a fearsome veteran, but as an eternal symbol. A symbol of the technological leap made by the Soviet industry, rising from the ruins of war. Its parade in Berlin was a silent, yet crystal-clear message to the world about the power and potential of the USSR. Today, these tanks, freed from the burdens of service, occupy places of honor in museums worldwide. They are monuments to brilliant, tragic, and incredibly influential engineering thought, proving that even a machine that missed its war can change the course of history just by once parading over the cobblestones of a defeated city.